100%. Absolutely. We're going to make you our mentor too. Who's my mentor? And he's not referring to you. I think the respect is mutual, but definitely. Honestly, like all jokes aside, you got to know what to do. I think that's right.
It's only difficult if you don't have the right teacher.
If you learn, so if you learn never correct, right? Then I can say that Cisco will be relatively okay. But the ultimate value and the ultimate networking tools in the history is that's the first feature. Because it goes into the deeper concept and it goes into consideration, it goes to a beyond that too. Yeah. So that's the
Okay, guys, let's get started here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through a little bit of Python. So we're just kind of getting started with a couple of things. Super fast. So what I like to do is I like to use something called Intitled. So for me, guys, what I strongly recommend that you do is install Intitled. I'm going to move this over here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Here's Intitled. You want Intitled. I think you're going to just so enjoy it. I'm going to do the beginning of this stuff on Windows for today, and tomorrow's session will be in Linux. So let's start with Intitled. I've got Intitled installed, so it opens up this idle command prompt. So let's start with some basics. So today what I wanted to start you with was just some really simple basics of programming in Python. All right, so what we want to do is we just want to try and get started with Python. So let's try a couple things. I'd say the first thing that you're going to like about Python is that you can print. So I'm just going to print 1, and you'll see that it prints 1. I can print 2, prints 2. Pretty easy. So let's print 3. That's nice and easy. Now, one of the things that you run into is, Joe, what's the difference between Python 2 versus Python 3? For what I'm teaching this week, it's going to be Python 2, specifically Python 2.7. Now, Python 3, Python, I know it might sound a little counterintuitive, but I'm going to recommend that you stay with Python 2. The reason that I say recommend stay with Python 2 is because there's so much more reference code to look at for Python 2. Now, I'm teaching Python from the standpoint of a person who's got absolutely no exposure to programming. So, if remember how I said we can print, I'll print 1, works perfectly. What if I want to print my name? So I print Joe, and you notice it throws an error. So if I want to print my name, I want to do it this way. So did you guys notice I said print, single quote, and then a left arrow key to move my cursor between the 2 quotes. Then I'm going to type my name. Okay, and I can do the same thing with double quotes. So I say print, double quote, move my cursor over, and then type my name. Okay, you're going to find that when you're first getting started with Python, that's definitely the way that you want to go. Okay, so if you're dealing with numbers, x equals 5, right? Not a problem. But if you're dealing with text, you need to put it inside of quotes like that. So anytime you're dealing with a number, right? Number, I don't need quotes. Anytime you're dealing with a string, you do have to put it in quotes. Number, string. Okay? So the biggest thing to remember is always to put quotes around anytime you use text. So if you have some text, you want to make sure that you throw it in quotes. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is let's just deal with some really simple math. Okay, so 2 plus 2. Now, how many of you guys noticed that I can space out the 2's like this? Right? And Python kind of doesn't care about how I did the spacing. I can do like a 6 minus 3. I can do an 18 divided by 7. Now, how many of you guys are looking at that going, hey, wait a minute, Joe. 18 divided by 7 isn't really 2, right? But what if I said 18.0 divided by 7? Now I got the full amount. And that's because Python, when we're talking with whole numbers, Python is going to talk back to you in whole numbers, right? So if you do a 9 divided by 2, right, Python is going to give you a whole number answer. But if you do 9.0 divided by 2, Python is going to give you an answer with decimal points. For people who've got some programming experience, you'll hear that called a float. All right, so let's try some other stuff. Let me say I do 5 times 5, like this. Okay, now let me go 5 times 5 times 5. So you can also say 5 star star 3 and come up with the same number. So you can do 5 to the 3rd power this way. You can also do POW, right? 5 comma 3 and come up with the same thing. So Python gives you a lot of ways to do stuff. And you can even do advanced math like absolute value, right? Okay, let's deal with some variables and then we'll call it quits, guys. So I would say the next thing that you want to do is, let's say x equals 18, and now I can do x plus 5. Now I can do x minus 10, right? I can do x star star 3, right? I can do y equals 54, and now I can say x plus y. Okay, I can also take G and make it input like this. Okay, I'll throw some double quotes in there, and I'll say number here, right? And now it wants a number. Now G is that number. So you can prompt the user for input. It's a really nice way to prompt the user for input. Now you need to remember that when you take data input, it needs to be a number. If you want to take in a string, let's say I make my age, right, and you're going to call it raw input. Enter your name here, right? So now it wants my name. Oh, that's probably not the good thing to do, huh, Joe? Okay, let's enter your age here. There you go. So how old I am, and now there's my age. So I can go my age star star 3. Oh my God. Now that doesn't work. Doesn't work is because we just talked about it. Raw input is for a string. So the better way to do it would be my name equals raw underscore input. Enter your name here. Now he says Joe. And now it's working. Now if I do G, right? G, we did G way up here, right? So raw input is for strings. Regular input, that's for integers. All right, let's finish up this last part and let's talk about some lists. Okay, so our next thing is to talk about some lists. So I'm going to say, let's make a list of attacks. And then I'll say stack overflows, heap overflows, integer overflows. Let's do SQL injection. Cross-site scripting. Remote file include. Okay, so now I get my list of attacks, and Python calls this a list. So if you say attacks, and you want the first item in your list, now you're going to be like, wait a minute, heap overflows is the second item in my list. Stack overflows is the first. So if you want the first item in your list, you're actually going to say attacks 0. So that's the only thing that you really need to know about having a list. Now, I know there's another thing called a tuple inside of Python, but when you're first getting started, I don't really think a person needs to know a tuple. He can start with the list and he can work with lists. The only real difference is that tuples are data that looks kind of like a list, but you can't change the data in a list. You can't change the data in a tuple. So that's the reason why I start with lists, and I don't even worry about tuples until we've been programming for a little while. All right, well, I think that's our Python minute. I think we did pretty good. So what we want to do is we want to come back tomorrow, and we want to use what we learned today to look at some log files. All right, guys, I'm going to call it quits right there, and I'm going to go grab some lunch. You guys enjoy. I'll see you tomorrow.